We have a native of the Oxnard Plains, Jeff Maulhardt. Jeff's been a retired history school teacher, insurance, I think, also. And
That's not retired.
No, that's not retired. So if you need insurance, Maulhardt Insurance. And then he's a fifth generation Oxnard person. He's the author of 14, probably plus books.
15 now.
And 15 books. And he has been, him, along with my friend Frank Nauman, have been very good to us at the Hueneme Museum. And the piano we got here from the McGrath family was through the help of Jeff Maulhardt and Frank Nauman. And Frank donated the money to have a piano we removed the piano into here. So we've been blessed with these two marvelous people. Jeff is going to be speaking today on Oxnard Sugar Beets, Ventura County's lost crop. So I'd like to introduce Jeff Maulhardt and thank you all for coming today.
Out of curiosity, does anybody own this book? Okay, a couple of people. Maybe by the end of today we'll have some more owners. In any case, this was my 14th book that I've written, and I want to say this from the beginning that no matter how many books I write, there's no way I'm going to cover the whole history of the area. There's just so much stuff out there, and I really like that. I mean, each book I learn something more that might lead to another book. And even since this book came out, I've gotten people come up to me with more pictures and more stories, and so I hope to write more and more chapters of Oxnard and Ventura County history. What I liked about this book is that it gave me a chance to do more than just present images and have a caption that tells the story behind it. And believe me, just doing that alone takes a lot of research because you have to get the caption right. And sometimes I find out after the fact there's more to it. With this book, it gave me a chance to put down 30,000 words to tell a story. So what I did is I talked about some early agriculture, I talked about the Oxnard family, development of Oxnard, and then some more agriculture later on. All these images that you see today are from this book here. This is something I put on there because if you want to learn more history, I'm part of the Oxnard Historic Farm Park, and next Friday we're having a happy hour out there, and we'll have more books and more stories and more things to look at. So next Friday, 4 to 7, we'll be out at the Oxnard Historic Farm Park. I have a couple of flyers over here if you want to pick those up on your way out. No, it's off of Rose Avenue. Okay, this is a picture of the books I've written. I started off with a book about the giants in Oxnard in 1997, and that came about because I was working on the first farmers of the Oxnard Plain, and my first 4 books were self-published. It's hard to get books published. There's not a lot of money for self-publishing, so what I did is I did pre-orders. I got enough pre-orders to get the first printing, and then when I sell those books, I make more printings to get ready for the next book. But in any case, I was doing the first farmers, came across information about the giants in Oxnard. That became my first book in 1997. After my 4th book, Arcadia Publishing approached me about doing a book on Oxnard. And so the first book was Images of America, Oxnard. They realized that there's such a long history, they asked me to split up into 2 volumes, 1867 to 1940, 1941 to 2004. After 10 books with Arcadia, I just got signed up with HBN Books out of Texas, and that middle picture is a painting I had commissioned of the Oxnard Plain, and that's going to be the cover of the next book that will be out in a month or 2. And that's another book, too, that allowed me to write a little bit more, 30,000 words to tell a story. The unfortunate thing is when I put this together, it's usually 50 to 60,000 words. So I have to go back, and it's really hard to take information out when you know it belongs. So that just means more books. And of course, we all know that Hueneme was the hub of the county for a lot of years, back in the early 1870s. Some of these images I got from the county museum, and also some of the images I got from this museum. And everybody brought their produce here to Hueneme to the wharf. There wasn't a railroad track on this side of the river until 1898, and so the first 30 years, everybody had to go through Hueneme, or as my grandpa used to call it, Hueneme, before they could ship out their produce. It's another image of convergence here going towards the wharf. People came from Simi Valley, Conejo Valley, Ventura, and of course the Oxnard Plains. This is an image of them coming across from Simi Valley, and most people use mules because they're a little bit stronger and easier to train than horses. Here's a breakdown of the Oxnard Plain, which include Hueneme there, the little square in the bottom left-hand corner. And you can see the biggest section there is J.D. Patterson. He was from the East Coast, and he actually purchased almost 6,000 acres. And maybe about a third of it was actually marshland. And it wasn't until 30 years later when the Oxnard factory purchased that land that they're able to tile underneath the ground and drain out a lot of that water and make it more productive. So you can see some of the early, this is from 1878, and you can see Bard's name on there. Bard's name is on this quite a bit, but as most of you may know, he was more of the land agent for Thomas Scott. So he didn't own a lot of that, he just would sell and get his cut. These are some of the names of some of the early farming families. The Gonzalez family was here back in the 1850s, 60s. They're part of the 8 people that were granted El Rio de Santa Clara o la Colonia, which is the colony by the Santa Clara River. And though they weren't known as farmers, they did have some farmland off Gonzalez Road with a couple of adobes that they built during the days that they had the rodeos on this side of the river. You can recognize all the names: Bard, Saviors, down through the Filer, Kaufman, Pettit, Rice family. Of course, we recognize all these names now because they're the roads that we pass through, named after them. These guys are part of the first group that planted the first crop in the Oxnard Plain. From left to right is Christian Borchard, his son John Edward Borchard, who went by Ed Borchard. Their cousin of John Edward was Casper Borchard, who ended up over in the Conejo area, although we started in Oxnard. And then Godfrey Maulhardt, who came over with the Borchards in 1867. So what happened was Christian Borchard there on the left came during the gold rush, and he went ahead and serviced the miners by bringing out supplies. He had a boarding house there for a while. Then he got into farming in the San Joaquin Valley in 1866, and then he got flooded out. So he started looking for the next area where he might continue his farming ventures, and he came down to Ventura County. They bought 1,000 acres from Jose Lavero. Jose Lavero's the person named Lavero Theater after. Jose got the land from the Gonzalez family. And so what Christian did when he bought that first 1,000 acres, the first one to buy 1,000 acres off the original grantees, he planted barley and wheat. Being new to the area, he didn't know what would work, but he knew he needed a dry crop because they didn't have irrigation set up. So he planted those two, 30 acres each, and the wheat rusted, so it didn't do too well. But the barley took off. So he knew that he had a crop in barley, and from there, he was able to start his farming ventures. This is a picture of the Gonzalez adobe in Santa Barbara. And again, they did build a few, probably not that big, on the Oxnard Plain. And that's actually where Christian Borchard stayed when he first came here. And this is the top part reads dwelling house. Let's see, dwelling house and something. Oh yeah, adobe, La Casa Vieja. So the old house. So that's where Christian stayed for the first couple years before he could build his own house. Now this is what Christian Borchard saw when he first came here. This is what all the early farmers saw. This is what the Sagers family saw. This is what the McGrath family saw. In the areas that were not cultivated, they saw this mustard plant that was growing everywhere. And there's a couple of stories on how that first came here. Some people think it came over with the cattle that came over from Spain. Some people think it may came when the Franciscans were here and they were passing the seed along on their trail from mission to mission. In any case, it took over the landscape, and what Christian Borchard did is he actually cultivated it and sold it and made money off of it. So the very first crop before barley was actually this mustard plant. And we still see it around today.
What did they use it for?
Mustard. No, not for cattle feed, believe it or not. Anyway, this is a ledger, and I like to point this out. It's kind of hard to see on the screen here. Bring it back.
We can make it smaller. You want it?
Closer.
Oh, here you
Hold it back.
You're worse than me, Larry.
Go forward. Make it a little closer.
Well, help me, John.
As Larry's working on that, that's a ledger from 1872, and it's handwritten and poorly written because those first people coming over here didn't have an education, or very little education. Thank you. A lot better. And so they spelled everything phonetically. And on the top, I typed up what was written on here, then I translated below it. Jacob Maulhardt, volunteer barley, 40.5 acres, 1.504 acre, 6075. Translates to Jacob Maulhardt cut 40 acres of volunteer barley for $1.50 an acre, totaling $60. So I like to tell that story. I taught school in Oxnard for a lot of years, and I tell my students that my relatives used to cut an acre of barley by hand for $1.50 an acre. And then I'd give them $2 an acre to mow my lawn. In any case, so that's from 1872. And on there too, it shows the names of the Leonard family and other people. They all worked for each other because the population was so low in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s, and it was dry farming, so you didn't need a big workforce. Let's see here. Then I have a section in the book about lima beans, which became the next big crop, another dry farming crop. And this is a picture of Henry Lewis and his son Joe. He also had another son, William Leachman Lewis, who I found out after the fact is also another son. And anyway, there's a couple stories on how lima beans came to Ventura County. Robert McAllister was from Carpinteria, and the story is either someone invited him on the ship that was docked out there from Lima, Peru, or he knew somebody went there. In any case, he liked the beans for his meal so much, he got a hat full of beans, and he planted them on his hillside in Carpinteria. And without paying too much attention to it, he came back later on and noticed that the plants were flourishing, and so the other farmers noticed that, and so little by little each year, the local farmers started planting lima beans. They eventually came to Ventura County by the 1880s. And here's a picture of some lima bean threshing in Ventura County. This is the orchard petted threshing outfit. And by 1900, there was 24,000 acres in lima beans. So it was quickly taking over as a top crop. This is actually around 1910 off Rice Road. This is Lewis Maulhardt. He was my great-grandfather. And it's funny because I come across a couple of these panoramics, and there's a lot of the same men in all of these panoramics. Come to find out, a lot of them were the Portuguese. And they were very adept at working in the bean fields. And I got this from one of the descendants of the Portuguese families. And they were the same people that worked on the Leonard Ranch, and I have a picture of that bean threshing outfit also. This picture of the Diedrich brothers with the caption by 1920, 118,000 acres were planted in lima beans. Yeah, all this is in your book, so don't take notes. You don't have to memorize it. There's no quiz today. But what's interesting is that I'm sure a lot of you have been here. Even as late as the 1960s, I remember hearing that, Oxnard was the lima bean capital of the world. So lima beans were here before the sugar beets and after the sugar beets, as well as during the sugar beets. This is the Nauman brothers, and they're sitting on some sacked lima beans. And then, because so many people were growing lima beans, farmers are always looking for another crop, another cash crop, another way to make money, of course. But if everybody's growing the same thing, the price is lower. So John Edward Borchard, Ed Borchard, lived off Ventura Road in Gonzales. He was growing this version of sugar beets called mango wurzel that he used to feed his livestock.
Wow.
And his son, Henry Oxnard, was going to school with Albert Maulhardt over in LA at St. Vincent's. And they heard about the Chino factory that was to the south of them. And so they took some of these sugar beets there to have them processed with the idea, maybe we can make some money off the sugar beets we have here. What they found out is that the sugar beet he was growing had a low sugar content. But because he showed interest, the people at the factory in Chino gave them some sugar beet seeds to bring back to Ventura County. And this is 1896. So Albert Maulhardt was one of the people that went over there, and he was in his 20s, and John Edward Borchard already had a lot of other ventures going on, so he really couldn't take up the whole venture of that. So Albert took that over and started planting sugar beets in the area. So what he did is he actually started a 2-year beet experiment. He went to 50 different ranches in Ventura County. He planted 2 to 5 acres of beets, and it totaled about 250 acres. With that, after the first year, he sent those to Chino, and they were just really impressed with the sugar content. It was between 18 to almost 30% in sugar content. It was surpassing what they had in Chino. So the people from the Chino factory said, hey, if you can duplicate that one more year, we'll commit to building a factory. In the meantime, it was kind of interesting, they also got a hold of Klaus Spreckels.
Yes.
And Spreckels was the one that was competing with the Oxnard to build a factory here. And they were competitors for a lot of years. But it was Henry Oxnard who did a lot of the early work to establish the beet industry in the United States. His family actually were in the sugar industry back in Louisiana in the 1840s, when one of his uncles was sent down south and hooked up with the Brown family and got into the sugar cane industry. So in the 40s and 50s, that's what the Oxnards were doing, that branch of the Oxnards. And they did that until about 1859. And then something happened in 1860 to change that. What would change that, you think?
Civil War.
Civil War. So they lost their workforce, and they went to the East Coast, and that's where the Oxnards continued working in the industry. They were actually manufacturing it in Boston and later New York. Now, the father of the 4 Oxnard brothers that were involved in the sugar industry was Thomas Oxnard IV, and he was the one that was in Boston and New York who had a plant that would process the sugar.
That was cane sugar.
Yeah, that was cane sugar. And really, the difference between the two is very minimal. In fact, from the things that I've read, once you break it down and you get it down to the sugar level, it's the same molecular structure. It's just the process of doing it. And the difference also is that sugar cane has to be grown in a very wet area, in a humid area. And the beets can be grown in just about any climate, as long as the soil is conducive. So once Henry Oxnard realized that he could develop something that would make the family some money, and he realized they were doing it in Europe, and he'd been to Europe a couple times, in France and Germany, he worked with some other people to get some legislation that would make it beneficial to build some factories where they wouldn't tax the importation of the big machinery, they wouldn't tax the importation of labor force, workforce. And with that, he built a couple of factories. The first, or 2 of them were in Nebraska, and they also named one of the hotels there after the family, the Oxnard Hotel. So the first Oxnard Hotel was in Nebraska, not Oxnard, not California. And then 1891 was a Chino factory establishment, and it wasn't a real big factory, but it was successful enough that they knew that they wanted to invest in another area. But legislation changed, so Henry kind of backed off for a little bit and worked on some other ways to try to get some tax breaks. Here's a political cartoon I got from the descendants of the Oxnards, and this is Henry as the sugar king, and you see the guy on the left walking away, that's Teddy Roosevelt, who was actually one of his classmates over at Harvard back in the 1880s, and later on they became rivals because at one point the sugar industry was trying to monopolize the industry, and we know from history that Roosevelt was against monopolies. Then, after all the experiments that Albert Maulhardt did, and with the cooperation of a lot of other leading farmers, the Oxnards committed to build a $2 million factory, which, if you translate that in today's money, is between $40 and $50 million. But in my research, I found out the Oxnards were not the only investors. They had a lot of other people back them up. In the book, you'll find out their names. So they had a lot of support because they realized it's a business venture for them too. So anyway, this is a picture of the original Ventura Free Press, original copy of the Ventura Free Press that announces Beet Sugar Factory, October 22nd, 1897. So that's when Ventura County found out they're going to have a sugar factory in an area that became known as Oxnard. So, and you can see the lower caption, $2 million factory offered, provided 20,000 acres are pledged to Beets. So as long as 20,000 acres are pledged, they could do it. But they also needed a railway, they needed some other 2 concessions before they would build it. One of the, 2 of the people that were real instrumental in the development of the Beet factory in Oxnard were James Driffel on the left. He was a superintendent who started off over in Chino, and eventually was transferred over to Oxnard to oversee the building of that. And he also laid out the town site of Oxnard in 1898. And then the guy that's right is Joe Seiler, who was a master mechanic, and then later became the mayor of Oxnard for about 10 years, starting in 1910. This is a picture of them in front of the 1 millionth bag in 1916. This is a picture of them laying the foundation of the sugar factory in December 1897. And this was from a panoramic picture that somebody came across that was in a dumpster when they were tearing down the factory in 1959. He rescued it, and he waited for me to start doing my research back in the 1990s. Then he contacted me and then allowed me to scan the picture. So it's nice he waited all those years for me to be ready to do it. This is the base of one of the two smokestacks, 150 feet high they were. And from what I understand, you can see it throughout the county. You can see it coming down the grade. You can see it from Ventura. And during processing time, you can smell it also.
That was at Oxnard Boulevard, Vineyard Avenue area approximately.
It was located near 5 points. So Woolley Road and Oxnard Boulevard. And there's still two of the remaining factory buildings I can show you. Yeah. I don't know if you knew where the Skyview Theater was in Oxnard. It was across the street from there.
What was that building on 5th and Pleasant Valley?
That was a Lima Beet warehouse.
That was a
in the
lot. I always
1940s.
thought that was the sugar.
When you buy my next book, you'll see a picture on the cover.
Okay.
So here's some postcards of the sugar factory. What was interesting, at one time, it was the largest sugar factory in the world. And Klaus Freckles was very aware of it and very competitive. And within a short amount of time, within a year or two, he built one slightly bigger so he could make the claim. Here's an early picture of downtown Oxnard before there was a pagoda. And it shows a layout of the Plaza Park.
Wow, look at those trees.
And so it's probably around 1900. They would bring in buildings throughout the county, a lot from Hueneme.
Yeah, they came on the wagons.
Here's another picture. This is before the pagoda also. So it might have been on 1906 for this picture. You can actually see the Oxnard Hotel and Masonic Lodge on the far left. The far left, that building there, the tall building, that was the Masonic Lodge. And the one next to it was the Oxnard Hotel. This is a picture of the Oxnard Grammar School. And you can see that the early days of Oxnard, they put a lot of time and effort into making it a really nice place to come to. This is showing the population increase over the years. I don't expect you to see all the exact numbers, but you can see how from 1900 to about 1940, it was just almost flat. You know, a couple thousand people a year would come to the area. I have another screen that would show the numbers, but 1940, right after 1940, when we had the construction of the naval base, and when people started coming here and seeing the area and wanting to come back or never leaving, the population went up. This slide shows the numbers, 1900, 1,200 people in the Oxnard area. 10 years later, 2,500. 1920, 4,000. And then you can see almost 2,000 a year. A big jump from 1940 to 58,000 to 21,000. And then on the right, I put a key of the decades, kind of showing what was going on. 1870s, 1900 dry farming. You didn't need a big workforce. When the sugar factory came in, you needed a workforce to plant, to thin, to harvest, to process. So you needed a whole new workforce. That was 1900 or so. Or 1920, They encouraged workers from Mexico to come because during the World War I, a lot of men went over to Europe, and when they came back, not everybody wanted to go back to the farm. Kind of saw the world. And then by the time we get to 1970s, 1990, ag changed to strawberry, celery again. Need a bigger workforce, bigger population. Another breakdown of ag in Ventura County and Oxnard, dry farming, corn. 1890s, they tried potatoes. They had the starch factory in Hueneme for under 10 years. But they tried it, and they didn't make a lot of money off of it, so they continued with lima beans.
Achille Levy was one of the instrumental people in getting people to get off of barley and go to lima beans, primarily because the people who made beer in the Midwest decided they didn't want to go all the way out here for their barley. So he knew that that market was going to dry up, and he talked to a lot of people who were doing lima beans.
Yeah, he was instrumental in a lot of the development of the area for sure. And then you can see walnuts and lemons started coming into the picture in 1910 and 20. Lemons in the 30s became one of the top crops, and I think it's number 2 actually in the county now. Row crops in the 50s. Of course, strawberries and celery are a couple of the top crops nowadays. Raspberries are number 5, I think. Some of the early groups include the German Society. This is from 1903. It shows they had a barbecue. This is off Hueneme Road.
Yeah.
And upstairs they had a ballroom where people were dancing. I found an article in the old Oxnard Courier. They talked about what a good time everybody had. It started at 9 in the morning daytime, to 2 in the morning, nighttime. And there was no problems whatsoever, no rowdiness, they said. And they had tri-tip, which is new to people from the East Coast. I'm going to go and tell you, I was going to tell you later, but Bob Oxnard, a descendant of the Oxnards, came here. He's from Florida. When he came to town and I gave him a tour, I took him over to the collection, and we went to Larson's, and I told him that they used to have tri-tip in the old days. He'd never had it before, so he ordered that and absolutely loved it. So I turned Bob Oxnard on to tri-tip. There's a picture of the Japanese workforce. They came here in 1898-99. By 1909, I found out that 40% of the ag labor force was Japanese. But they were such proficient farmers that they started farming on their own and leasing land. And in some cases, they could own it until the the Alien Land Acts, which limited the lease to 3 years. But I found out and talked to some of the old timers that the way they got around that is, if a farmer wanted to lease land to a person who's going to pay money, he doesn't care about those laws. He's going to find a way to go ahead and make it worthwhile and make their money again. So they would just pass the lease on to the brother, to the sister, to whatever. So the people in Oxnard didn't make that law. By 1910, the Japanese workforce, they grew 60% of the sugar in California. And then by the 1950s, after World War II, and a lot of the LA areas were starting to be built up, a lot of Japanese families started coming to Ventura County, and you have like the Hiji family and a lot of the others that came here and continued their farming ways and became very proficient farmers in Ventura County. I have a list of a lot of them in the book. The Chinese workforce, they only worked in the field for a brief amount of time. Mostly they worked as cooks for the farmers, or they started businesses like near A Street. Of course, you guys heard of the opium dens and everything that was a part of it. That was just a small part of the Chinese culture. There's a lot of other things that a lot of them did that was very valuable for the area. I mentioned the Portuguese earlier. They came here around the turn of the century. A lot of them replaced the Japanese workers. The Mexican laborers became part of the workforce 1898. They were about a third of the workforce. The Japanese are about 2/3 of the workforce in Oxnard. By 1917, with the outbreak of World War I, there's another work shortage. So they built these adobes off 5th Street and the railroad tracks, and these duplexes were for families to come over from Mexico, thinking that they would stay here and they wouldn't have a work shortage if the families came with them. Yeah, Ventura came later in 1942. If I went too far now. I do have a mention of Braceros in the book also. One of the chapters is called Factory Years, and this is another picture of a gathering they had in February 22nd, 1898. So people throughout the county came to this barbecue to see what was happening to this area in the middle of the plain. This area they knew was going to be the new sugar factory. This is a picture from the Patterson Ranch, which the sugar owners purchased in 1900, and they planted a lot of that to sugar beets. This is a picture of the Daly family in the front. They were the, Charles Daly was in charge of the Patterson Ranch for 25 years or so. This is another view of the sugar factory, a nice clear picture with a train load coming in to drop off the sugar beets. Here's the interior of the sugar beet factory with the sugar all stacked up into 100-pound bags. This is a picture I got from Armando Lopez of his father, is on the far right. And what they were doing is keeping the beets off the tracks as they came in. Here's a picture of Sam Camacho Sr. He came with the Bracero program in 1947. He actually came here to work, but they found out that he worked in a kitchen, and because of that, they put him right to work as a cook in the Pacifico camp, later on the Buena Vista camp, and the Trace SS labor camp, and he ended up purchasing one of them later on. I worked with his son Sam over at Frank's school.
Is that on 5th Street?
Yeah. So the Bracero program ran from 42 to 64, included 5 million workers in 24 states during 22 years. So I didn't realize so many states were involved in it. This is a breakdown of how the sugar is actually processed. It comes into the factory, and first, on the left-hand side, it's washed. Then it's weighed. Then it's sliced. Then they put it under some hot water to soak. Then they purify it with limestone and some other chemicals. And then the juice is filtered. The concentrated juice is transformed into a syrup. The syrup is boiled into crystals. They're filtered, then they're dried, and then bagged. Here's a picture of beet dumping from the beet carts. There's a rail of sugar beets coming in. They had different dump sites throughout the county, and the farmers would come in with their beets, load them up. They'd be able to dump theirs into these carts, and then these carts would come down to the factory. By October 26, 1958, beet production was down to 4,000 acres. The Oxnard factory had bagged nearly 40 million one-pound bags during that time. It came to the point where it was either renovate the factory with new machinery and accept imported beets from other areas of California, or close it down and sell the property, which is what they did. And one of the investors was Martin Smith. He had several partners. They bought the 124 acres, and they bought it for $1.5 million. In the book, I have a little chapter of post-sugar beet history, and this is a picture of the Ben Oxnard family. Of the four brothers, Ben was not involved in the Oxnard Sugar Factory, but he was involved in the other sugar factories with his brothers. Why he wasn't involved in Oxnard, I don't know, but his family, his descendants are the ones that are around today that come back and visit Oxnard. Well, Henry had 2 daughters and eventually had no more heirs. Robert did not have any children. James had 2 kids and their heirs did not produce anymore, so it's only this family. There are some cousins along the way that also are interested in this area, but ironically, it's the one brother not involved that has the heirs that come back, including these 2 people. Thornton Oxnard on the left, and his father Henry J. Oxnard. They came to the area in 2001, so I gave them a tour of the area and to the plaque off 5th Street, and then we went over to the sugar factory site. And then at the sugar factory site, we took a couple pictures. Right now it's owned by Western Pre-Cooling, where they package produce. And I went to lunch with Thornton Oxnard and his 3 kids. And I asked them, do you want to go someplace and get a nice steak or a good hamburger? Or do you want to go someplace and get an authentic bean burrito? So we went over to El Ranchero by the Oxnard Library and got a couple of greasy burritos. And what was fun is that he insisted on paying, which I did not argue with. And so when he gave the guy the credit card, he took it and I said, hey, you better check that credit card. So he looked at it and it says Thornton Oxnard. He looked at it and he looked at Thornton and he said, are you one of the Oxnard brothers? I said, no. It's a descendant or relative. This is a picture of Bob Oxnard from Florida who came to the area, and this is on the back side of that same building. I took a lot of pictures of Bob Oxnard when he was here, and for a while we were doing a calendar for the museum, the Oxnard Farm Park Museum, and one of my friends, Jim Gill, decided to sponsor a page with all the pictures I have of Bob Oxnard in Oxnard. So I think this is from 2016, and we still have old calendars available. So with all that, I've been involved with creating a home for Oxnard history, and it's a great place for me because that's when people can join up with me and bring me their pictures or bring me their implements or bring me their stories. And from there, I've been trying to write more history. The site itself is, at one time was farmed by Jeffrey Maulhardt. That's a picture of him and his wife and their daughter, adopted daughter Anna on the left. They sold it to the Filer family. That's a picture of Bob Filer. He was the last one to farm there. I think he passed away in 2004 or so. And this is a picture of Bob at the farm park. I would go and visit him, and I asked him about trying to save the old buildings at the site. And he agreed it was a good idea, but he said, well, with time we'll get to it. And I tapped my watch, I had on my wrist, I said, Bob, you're 92, can I start the process? So he agreed, but I backed away from that plan when he got sick and his family didn't want to get involved. And I worked with the developer, John Lane Homes, to get an acre of land and form a nonprofit to start the process. One reason it's important at that site is on the right-hand side is the Maulhardt Winery built in the 1870s. The people on that committee were Christian Borcher, Dominique McGrath, Thomas Cloyne, the three Maulhardt brothers, and that's their picture on the left. They built the Santa Clara Chapel, which you'll see in this next picture, which was originally located by the Esplanade and moved over towards Rose Avenue. And Godfrey Maulhardt grew 250 grapevines to supply the church with their wine for sacrament. This is a rare picture from the farm park, probably 1885 or so. The back row is interesting. You can see some of the people that were early pioneers. The guy in the top left, that's Justin Pettit. And then next to him, not in this image, but in the book picture, you'll see a picture of John Edward Borcher. You'll see Freeland Hartman and Louis Filer. And what was interesting, all four of those men married the four Kaufman sisters.
No kidding.
Yeah, because they're the only four women in the whole area at the time. And then the musicians you see in there, that's the Gonzalez brothers, a couple of them. They were local musicians. They would play for a lot of the events and give lessons to the young farm boys and girls. And then also, it's hard to see, but you can see Godfrey Maulhardt sitting there. To his right, you see like, there's a little kid, there's one kid, two kids. Right above there, there's a man with a hat and sideburns. We can't picture him, but I tell people that's either a McGrath or a Donlin or a leprechaun. I'm not sure, but it's like an Irish person.
Is Gonzalez named after the Gonzalez musician? Gonzalez the road?
Yes, right. Here's a picture of the buildings on the top left of the Godfrey Maulhardt home later on. The fathers lived there. And then on the right, that's when we're taking over. I formed the nonprofit 2002, 2004, we were able to get on the site and do a couple things. And then on the bottom, that shows a picture of our artist rendering of what we want to do. We want to recreate the wraparound porch. We had a nice article in the VC Star in December that talked about my sponsors, which include Jim Gill, Frank Nauman, and Chuck Covarrubias. And the ironic thing is that their fathers and my grandfather all graduated from Oxnard High in 1928.
Wow.
And here we are years later, and they're my biggest sponsors, and we're trying to save something in common, which is our past. And with that article, we actually raised $25,000 halfway to our goal.
Wow. Congratulations.
So we're hoping that this next book that I'm doing, the profits from the book go to the farm park. Here's a picture of the farm park from last year that shows the winery on the right. The canary palm has been there since at least 1910. We got all the bricks donated from Lowe's. I got the CVs from the base to come out and lay that out. And they would not take any money to do the work, but they would take a burrito each day. So I had 8 people. It took them 2 weeks. So, you know, it cost me about $300 in burritos to get that laid out.
Pretty good cheese.
Yeah, good deal.
Yeah.
And then what we do is we sell these engraved bricks for $100. That's how we raise money. This is the order form on the right. And then it's nice when you go out, you can see the names of the people that have sponsored us. I always tell people you don't have to be dead to buy a brick or to get a brick in your name. And so it's nice when people do get on board. I know there's someone from the Donlin family that got together and got about 30 bricks.
Wow.
And Roz McGrath came over one time, she saw all the names, she goes, well, where are all the McGrath names? I said, I don't know, it's up to you to go ahead and tell your relatives. So she called them all up. Within a week, we got a brick order of 30 McGrath bricks.
All right.
So that next book, HBN Books, first half is called The History of Oxnard, and the second half is made up of sponsors. So what they did, they went around to local businesses and old families and stuff and tried to get people to sponsor a page and get their biography in it. And then the proceeds from the book go to the farm park. This is a picture I came across for the book. This was from Seaboard Lemon Company,
Yeah.
1949, so that's in the new book coming up. And then again, I commissioned Lisa Kelly to do my cover, and as soon as this goes to the next page, you'll see there it is. So that's the Oxnard plane. I picked out certain buildings. I did pencil drawings for her, which she couldn't interpret, but she could. I put the names next to it, and I sent her real pictures of them. So upper right top, that's Simon Combs' building, and on the side of it, it said New Jerusalem. That became El Rio.
Yes.
So we had the story in there about that. Below that, on the right-hand side, towards the top, that's now the Oxnard Pallet Company, but that was the lima bean warehouse, that the guy mentioned earlier. And then also, I want to make sure we got the Hueneme Wharf on the bottom there, and the Hueneme Lighthouse, important parts of our history. And then on the left, that's a picture of, or painting of Rudolph Valentino, who was with, and he actually did that movie, The Sheik, in 1920. And in my research, I found out there was over 30 to 40 pictures that were made in this area at the beaches in the 1920s. But somebody got the bright idea to go ahead and subdivide the lots and call it Hollywood Beach. But unfortunately, what they had to do is knock down the sand dunes, and they stopped filming. So they lost the industry, but they gained some lots. So at this point, I want to remind you that next Friday from 4 to 7, we have a happy hour at the farm park. I have a couple flyers here. If not, you can go to the farm park website, and it has information on it. And I'll take a few questions here. And then I did bring a couple of these books here if anyone wants to purchase. They're only $20, and you can take it with you. And so at this point, are there any questions?
Yeah, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Last year I went to the farm park.
Yeah, I remember.
Now the house, did you do any changes? Or is it the
We
same?
haven't done any changes to the house. We're in the process of raising money. So last time we were there, we started doing a promotion to raise money, and we raised $25,000 for it. We need to get to $50,000 to do the first phase, which would take off some of the sides and reinforce the flooring. So we're getting closer to that. We're hoping with the new book coming out, and I talked to somebody recently that might be a nice couple $1,000 sponsor for us. And with that, we hope to maybe start working on it by fall time. Yes?
Is the Santa Maria Sugar Beet Factory still in operation? And where is the sugar beet capital of the world now?
Good question. I'm not sure about the Santa Maria factory at all. I haven't heard. I don't think it is, but I haven't heard. But Minnesota is where they have the archives for all the sugar factory, and that's where they have a main building. So I don't know if Minnesota is the capital of the world as far as sugar beets, but they did grow them in Colorado, believe it or not, and also in Imperial Valley. They grew a lot of sugar beets, and still do to this day. So in the northeast, Wisconsin, Minnesota, they grow sugar beets because you can grow it in the summer, and Colorado and over in Imperial Valley. Yeah.
I've never seen sugar beet wine or whiskey. Has that ever been done?
I've never heard of that. We do grow sugar beets here at the farm park, and what we did, we made, we actually baked them up to see what they would taste like. And it tastes pretty similar to, kind of like a sweet potato. And you can actually cut off pieces of it, and it's like sweet jicama. So there's other things we can do, but once we process those, or once we pull out of the ground, maybe late September or so, come by the farm park, we'll just take a couple and see if you can make some whiskey out of it. We'll share.
Is it sugar,
But I haven't heard.
is sugar whiskey
My
just
Alcoholics
rum?
Anonymous group won't let me do that.
Okay, good call, sorry. Sorry.
Sugar, I mean, rum is made out of sugar.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's what they do
Yeah.
in Hawaii.
Oh, yeah.
What's the address of the farm park?
It's 1251 Gottfried Place, and it's off of it's off of Rose Avenue and Cesar Chavez Drive. So not too far from St. John's Hospital.
On the right-hand side, yeah?
Yeah. Yes.
Can you talk about the water supply, say at the turn of the last century? I know obviously the rivers, but was there a lot of wells being drilled?
The wells were not drilled until the sugar factory time. At that time, nobody could really afford it. They didn't have the equipment. But with the sugar factory, that's where the first wells were actually drilled. And again, then Albert Maulhardt was involved in that. He had a well drilling rig that he would go and do that. And they also had some channels that came from the river, like down Rose Avenue, we call it Ditch Road. So there's other ways that they got water. Yes?
You offer tours, you guys?
Tours of the farm park?
Of the farm park or just of the old historic sugar beet area?
Well, I'm part of the Oxnard Chamber of Commerce, and I'm also part of their leadership class, and we do a history class every year as part of that. And so for the last 3 years, they meet at the farm park. I give a slideshow on the history of Oxnard and the area, and then we go to the sugar factory site. We go down to A Street and show them where China Alley was. We go to the Carnegie building and talk about that, take a tour. Then we end up at Heritage Square and talk about the houses and the people involved with that too. So that's part of the leadership. But other than that, no.
Also, I had another question. There's talk of tunnels underneath the streets there near
Yeah.
the Golden Chicken Inn, you know,
Right.
that kind of place.
That was only to escape the law enforcement, because a lot of those businesses had false fronts and a lot of gambling going on in the back. And they'd have people, you know, living through little peepholes, and they would have a raid there every couple of years in the 20s and 30s. By the 30s, a lot of that was pretty much wiped out, and by the 40s, they really made a conscious effort to get rid of all those buildings.
I heard the first
Tunnels.
constable of Oxnard was murdered or killed.
Yeah, in the late, yeah, that's true. I do talk about that in the next book too. I don't want to give away the plot. Yes.
You spoke about the precursor to the sugar beet here, they used as animal feed. What did they do with it? Did they grind it for silage and process it, or they just,
At that time,
at that time?
I'm pretty sure what they did, they took the top part, it looks like a lettuce.
Right.
They would use that part to feed the livestock. And the other part, you know, who knows what they did with it, but it wasn't grown for the purpose of sugars. It was grown to feed the livestock, and they would just have a certain section of it for it. And not everybody did it, but because they had a connection to the Germans that came over here, they would bring the seeds and try that.
Jeff?
Yes.
We have an old picture here that we blew up, and this is the site of the sugar beet factory. This was taken in about 1896, and it mentioned on the back who the surveyor was. So, I thought you might be interested.
Of course.
Too late for your book, but.
Next one. Well, I'd like to thank you, Jeff, for gracing our presence today. And asking Roberta, I haven't had a chance to go get anything, but Roberta made sure there was a bottle in the back for you.
Goosebumps, thank you.
And Johnny will announce the events coming and pass the hat. We appreciate any donations.
We don't get anything at all.
We appreciate all you people being here today. And like I said, I do have flyers of our upcoming events, and you're welcome to take one of these if anybody wants one. And we also, if anybody wants one, please let me know. We also have tours of the harbor. If you've never seen the harbor, this is one of the busiest ports on the west coast of California. If you've got a banana in your closet or in your refrigerator at home, and it's a Chiquita, anything this side of the Rockies came from Hueneme. So, but we do offer the tours of the harbor, they're free, and you're welcome to come. Just come to see us, we'll sign you up for it. Also, I do want to mention Memorial Day celebrations we're going to have. This is going to be the second Memorial celebration? Yeah. for years and years, you think right here next to the Navy base, we'd have memorial celebrations. The city of Hueneme never did. So last year we had our first memorial celebration. We're gonna have our second celebration. Here's some flyers here if you guys
Hey,
are
Jeff.
welcome to come and see it.
Did she have any old tools or anything? Or is it-
Hold on, Security Bob.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, if you want to come to this memorial celebration, it'd be a really, really neat stuff. We're going to have the Air Force band play. We're going to have the junior ROTC kids there. So please come and see us. If you're interested in any of our classes, we have rock painting classes. We have beach classes. So, and everything is free here. We don't charge anything for any of this stuff. Our workers are not paid. We're all volunteers. So if you guys know of any old pictures or any things you guys would like to donate to us, we would definitely appreciate it. Also, if you have anybody who's in the service, in the CBs or military from the local area, inside of our vault here, we've made a special place for our veterans. So after we get done here, I'll put up the screen and you're welcome to come here and take a look. The picture will be there forever, you know, and it'll be there for your family and grandkids to see. So we definitely appreciate it because without you guys' support, we don't exist. So thank you so much.
So it's actually $69.25.
Which was the name, it was donated. No, but he was one